Okay.
Well, hello, James.
Andy, how you doing?
I'm very well. So, welcome to another episode of Fighter's Mind. I'm really glad to have you here because when I think of Fighter's Mind, you come to mind because you are a martial artist, a very experienced martial artist, but also you're a very experienced NLPer, hypnotherapist, mind coach, whatever you want to call that. But so
Mm.
you've got the experience of both worlds. So that's why I was very keen
Y-
to interview you. So thank you for agreeing to do this.
You're more than welcome. I'm very happy to be here, and I do want to put a caveat into this. I am very interested in how we manage our mind, how we create, how we show up and engage with the world, right? Generally speaking, and of course, that idea of how we create ourselves and show up in the world is any context, right? That could be how we show up inside of, if we're a professional fighter, which I am not, how you might show up in the ring. How is it that you want to be in that moment? Now, the reason I say this is because I know you said I'm a martial artist, which I am,
Yeah.
and I'm not a lifelong martial artist. I started martial arts when I was 21. I'm 52 now. Uh, but I consider myself as a kind of like a geek martial artist with a real interest in it, a real kind of technical interest and a real love of it. I don't really consider myself a fighter because I'm not really, I've done some Muay Thai, I've done a little bit of freestyle wrestling and, some boxing and stuff like this, but I've never gone into competition. So I don't think of myself as a fighter in that sense, if you see what I mean.
I do. I mean, I do know you very well. And I know with on the martial arts side, you've got that discipline. You do. I mean, I think you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice. Okay, I know you're not a professional fighter, but
Yeah.
you really, especially for, and I'm a lot older than you, so I can say this, you
Hmm.
are getting on a bit now, take that the right way.
Yeah, it's all right. I'm
But
not
you're
going to take the.
still, but you're still putting yourself out there doing Muay Thai, doing freestyle wrestling. You really get involved. You're not like,
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely, like one of the things about, say, martial arts, I think, and I come from a quote unquote traditional martial arts background to a certain degree. Um, Chinese martial arts, and also I've done the Russian martial art extensively that is now definitely not in favor. But once upon a time, people thought it was cool back in the 90s. Um, I've done these things, and I really have respect for people in a way who go on YouTube and say those things are junk because they don't get tested. There's no pressure ever put on them. It's too easy for it to just disappear into the realm of the abstract. And I think that's fine if people are into that and they just want to do that. I think there's a problem when you get somebody that does traditional martial arts in quite an abstracted way. They really focus on their craft and then they claim they know this deadly kick-ass martial art that could beat anybody. And then they get challenged to something and they get their ass handed to them.
yeah.
They deserve that because they have lost touch with reality. So whilst you're quite right, I don't compete, but I do like to do when, I'm not training at the MMA gym anymore, but I like to go to the MMA gym to get the pressure on to see whether what's got legs and what's just kind of stuff that works in those rarefied training context.
And you do that with boxing as well, because you go to my boxing club and I like your idea that you put yourself out there, you're very open-minded, even though you have come from a traditional, you could say, internals. I'd say you're quite different to the norm because you put yourself out there. You're trying to test it.
Yeah, I think so. I like to look at things in a variety of different ways. I like to train things from a variety of different angles. Like in the end, I'm not a purist with any of the martial arts that I've done. I enjoy that kind of cross training thing. I enjoy finding the overlaps between things and the differences and what you can sort of bring in to different situations. So I really enjoy that. So something like boxing, for example, like a lot of people don't think of Tai Chi as a martial art, but I've always trained the martial arts side of Tai Chi, which is very, very rare, and not that it's got some similarities to the park Tai Chi that people see. But there's a lot of handwork skills and body work skills and this sort of thing. And you want to see if they translate because people do push hands and stuff like that. Those are they're sort of like semi-competitive but semi-cooperative drills. And really, sparring is a semi-competitive, semi-cooperative drill. It's not out and out brawling. It's not, it's semi-competitive, semi-cooperative because you're cooperating around whatever rule set you're going to spar by. But you get a lot of people in those who do these kind of traditional arts. They go, oh well, you can't use them with boxing gloves, right? You can't do it. You can't do Tai Chi with boxing gloves. And it is true that there's certain things that get limited, certain things that get taken away. But the basic principles you absolutely can apply with boxing gloves, particularly with boxing. Once you get into the infighting sort of area, there's a lot that you can apply, and there's a lot of the thinking that you can apply to boxing. And that often surprises people, I think, if you get into a little bit of a spar, it can throw a bit of a curveball in because you've got different sets of sensibilities and they're not expecting you to do certain things. Like maybe like a lot of boxers do this anyway, but if I'm coming in, I often want to use my jab to control someone's elbow, for
Mhm.
example. So I'm kind of jabbing in, but I want to jab in and get that elbow. And then through that elbow, I want to kind of get it trapped in and start to disrupt the balance a little bit and move to a better position for
Mm.
something a bit more kind of in the infighting range. So I'm thinking about the jab, not just to measure range or not just to sort of get a stiff jab in and get that
Mm.
blow in. I'm often thinking about it from a sort of control, arm and body control perspective, which is a very Chinese martial arts thing. You can still do that with a glove. Glove doesn't
Yeah.
stop you doing it.
And what I'm really interested in as well is the mindset. So how does like what you know in your as maybe as we talked about this earlier on, as a hypnotist or a coach,
Hmm.
how does that help your martial arts? And how does martial arts help your coaching?
Right.
There's sort of, I
Right.
see quite an overlap.
Yeah, I think there is quite an overlap. And one of the things I've often said before. I'm not quite sure what order to say these things in, so I'm just gonna say them probably in the order they come out. Um, so one of the things I was very interested in with getting into martial arts was the self-defense side of things, the ability to be able to handle situations out there in the world. And of course, that's not all about what you physically do.
Mm.
When you're out in the world and you perceive a threat, the question is how do you respond to that threat internally? Because your internal response to the threat comes before your external response.
Mm.
So, if you lose yourself to fear, I mean, maybe it'll go all right. Maybe things will kick off, maybe whatever. But fear can shut you down. You can go into, it's fight, flight, freeze, hide, avoid, submit. Now, maybe if you go into fight, that may be okay if you just got that kind of raw aggression. But you might lose a lot of your fight IQ, so to speak, through that fear.
Mm.
So for me, like there's that how do you manage the response? But before anything gets physical as well, in a sort of street situation, I sound like one of these for the streets guys. I'm not really, but in that kind of situation, there's a lot of psychology involved because you're often being assessed by other people for what kind of mark you are. Are you an easy mark? Are you going to be a victim? Are you going to be, people that sort of do violence and enjoy doing violence, I think in street situations. And I come from a reasonably small town that a lot of the people, a lot of the guys haven't got that much to do. So, they kind of like to fight. And they're often looking for a mark. They're looking for somebody to fight. So a lot of the time, it's like how you show up, how you present yourself in that moment, what you do within yourself can make a huge difference as to what happens next. Because if you look like a victim, if you act like a victim, if you feel like a victim, you massively up your chances of being a victim. So how is it that you want to be in that moment? Also, I don't personally, this is my personal strategy, think sort of trying to overly puff yourself up and start, that can be overcompensating. And people that know what's what. No, you're overcompensating. So you're still revealing your
Mm.
fear and your limitations. So I think a lot of it is like, well, how do you want to be in that moment? How do you want to be in a situation where people are looking like they're going to cause you injury? There's a psychological game there. There's state management involved. And the way that I do that is I have a self that I step into for those
Ah,
moments,
so
right?
yeah, this is good.
Yeah. So like there is a version of me that I'm going to step into that is reserved for those moments, right? And
Right.
it's quite kind of dark in some ways. It has a very quiet resolve to it, a real sense of solidity, and it's a way of being quiet, like I call it quiet, dark resolve, right? And I go into a state where now this isn't about facts, but like I'm ready. You move, bring it on, right? So really, actually, what usually goes through my head, if you excuse the language on this, and I don't want to come across like some violent, aggressive person because this isn't me. This is a state that I go into. I go into a quiet state of I will fucking destroy you, right? That's the feel. That's the energy. I don't say it. I just go into the feel, the energy of it, the quiet resolve. Now, somebody would go, oh, you think a lot of yourself, do you? No, it's not about thinking a lot of myself. It's about a choice about how I'm going to be in the moment. Now, I have done this many times in situations where it looked like things were going to kick off. And when I click into that mode, touch wood, and this has happened about 5 or 6 times across the years, where it's looked like I'm going to get a beating or someone's going to go for me. And when I've clicked into that mode, they just go, oh, and they walk away and they leave it. Could be a coincidence, but I think that we're actually quite good at reading things non-verbally. And I think it's because at that point, I'm switching from being a victim or a potential victim to being a predator. So I've sort of gone into predator mode, if that makes sense.
Mm.
And I've done this in a number of situations. I've done this on the just on Venice Beach by the pull-up bars and stuff. There was a guy there that was clearly decided I shouldn't be there and started on me, and I went into that mode. He backed off. I've done it in South Africa, where rather stupidly, everyone was clear you don't go out after dusk. I'm like, we need milk, and it's not quite dusk yet, so I'm going to go out. And I went into a convenience store, came out, and I got surrounded by a group of, there were a lot of them. They were quite young. They were like 14, 15, but there was a lot of them, and they were just overtly shaking me down for money. It was a bad situation because there's about a dozen of them or so. So even though there are like only 14, 15, these sort of street kids. But I did that there. I turned that on and I just like looked at them and I calmly moved through the group, went to my car, got in the car and disappeared. I've done it in quite a lot of situations. I had another situation. I was coming home late at night and a car pulled over by the side of the road and the doors opened and these four lads started to get out and they turned and I went into this state and they all as one got back in the car and closed the doors and then drove off. Now, as I'm saying this, I'm not saying I can control those situations. I'm aware that luck is always a factor.
Mm.
But I do think that we read situations unconsciously, and I think that people who are looking for victims read situations unconsciously. So it pays to be able to sort of like be in a state that is not a victim state. It
Mm.
doesn't guarantee your safety. It is not the pinnacle or the be all and end all of all martial arts. But it is about, how do you want to be? How do you choose to be in that moment?
Mm.
Right? In a sense, to use a martial arts metaphor, people talk about stance in traditional martial arts. You could call it an inner stance.
Mm.
What is the inner stance that you choose? And this, to me, this isn't just about martial arts. What a lot of people don't realize, or they believe I am what I am, right? I react the way I react in various situations. And they're not able to live at the level of choice because they live in reaction. When this happens, I feel like this. When somebody looks at me this way, I feel like this. When my boss says these things to me, I feel really small, right? And they're living in reaction, in their default reactions to things. And it doesn't occur to most people that they could be different. Now, you can't just choose to not be a certain way. Right? If you feel scared in a situation, you cannot choose to not be scared. That's a false choice. Not this is a false choice. A real choice is not this, that. So if you haven't got something else to choose, you have no choice. Right? That's just the way it goes. So a lot of people are trying to not do things, not be scared, not feel small, not feel insecure, not feel whatever in any situation, because it could be. I had a client just over the last few days who was saying that, when they speak to their boss, they just clam up and they feel like they can't express themselves properly. And it's a fear response, it's a threat response. That person cannot choose to not do that. But they can build an alternative way of being
Mhm.
that they click into and they can choose. And a lot of the stuff, like, on a basic level, when people talk about hypnosis, they think it's some kind of mind control thing. It's not really mind control. It's about connecting into your mind in different ways and using your mind intentionally to create the outcomes you want in your life.
Mm.
So if somebody goes into the theater of the imagination, for example, which is another way of, another name for what you might call hypnotic trances or hypnotic trance flows. They go into the theater of the imagination and they start to build this new version of themselves. And that new version of themselves, it might not be a one and done. They might not do it in one session. It might happen across time, but they build that version of themselves and they know what that version of themselves believes, how they think, how they show up, how they engage, what's important. It's kind of like an alter ego. And once they have that, now in those moments where perhaps fear, doubt, insecurity show up, you can step into that self that has clarity and resolve because you know that self now. You can now make that choice. And after a while, or even sometimes quite quickly, the choice gets made unconsciously. So like we can always build different ways of being. We can create different ways of being in any context of our lives. That to me is largely what hypnotic change work is about, is helping people do that.
Funny you say that, because I only discovered the other day that Mike Tyson, you've probably heard of him,
Hmm.
he's maybe quite a good fighter.
Yeah.
His mentor,
Uh,
and it
yeah.
turns out his guardian, Custamato,
Hmm.
apart from being a very accomplished boxing coach, was a hypnotherapist.
Huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he took he apparently adopted Mike Tyson about 13, 14, and from day
Yeah.
one he hypnotized him. And
Yeah.
I've been looking at videos of Tyson talk about this. He goes, he talked, it was on Joe Rogan, I think. He thought, yeah, he goes, I got hypnotized every day. And he goes, it's not for every day, but he goes, for me. And he goes, Cuss helped me tap into my ferocity,
Hmm.
will. And he goes, and
Yeah.
he was even saying he gets hypnotized all the time, even now. And I was like,
Hmm.
also, Floyd Mayweather, who
Right.
did okay at boxing, is a
Yeah.
massive hypnosis. I'm like, wow. So
Yeah.
it's woo or offbeat as we think. I mean, obviously it works to the
Well,
greatest boxers of all time.
yeah. I mean, I think it works because really, in the end, what people are doing with hypnosis or hypnotism is just actually working with how our minds work.
Mm,
It's not anything weird. It's not some kind of weird force that comes in and overrides how our minds work. It's working with how our minds work. And our
mm,
minds are fundamentally creative. We don't realize this, but we're creating our experience in the moment all the time with our minds, according to the sense that we make of that moment and who we are in that moment. It's all unconscious, but we do not live in the world as it is. We live in the world as our mind makes it up to be. So we have a huge amount of influence when we start to turn the tables around a little bit. Now, there's a line from the weird guru slash cult leader Osho, which I really like,
yeah.
which is that the mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. Right. So if your mind is going to do random stuff, your mind can create so much. It can create wonder, it can create curiosity, but it can create terror and it can create horror, and all sorts of things. The mind is always creating. You work with somebody who does worry. As my old mentor Steve Charney used to say, worry is a misuse of the imagination. Right? His view was your imagination. We are blessed with imagination to create our future, to create who we are. It is a creative faculty that we are blessed with to make our lives better. But if it gets misused, well, we start terrorizing ourselves with our imagination. That's what worry is. It's like the thing that we're worrying about isn't happening right now, all that. But what if this? What if that? So the mind is making up terror and horror and all of this.
Hmm.
And then we act like it's the master. So it can be a terrible master in that situation. But if you look at the biggest influence on me with regard to hypnosis and hypnotherapy is Milton Erickson, who was really teaching people to become the master of their minds, right? Teaching people to do different things with their minds that would just serve them better and would have better outcomes come out. And really, to me, that's what we're doing when we're doing hypnotic work.
Hmm. So, what do you, so talk about hypnosis and NLP or coaching. What do you think, what would you do if you're working with a fighter? What would be your approach to get somebody
You
in
know,
that?
that's a very interesting question. Um, and I've got some views on this that probably some people in the hypnosis world or hypnotherapy world wouldn't like to hear. Um, and maybe even in the sort of quote unquote life coaching world, right? Now, the reason I say this is because let's take life coaching, for example. A lot of life coaches like to think they don't have to have any expertise on life, right? They just have to have good technique, good questions, good. They don't really need to be experts on life. And that's fair enough because who wants to be so arrogant as to say, I'm an expert on life, so I'm going to be a life coach.
Hmm.
But in any other area of coaching, that's absurd. Right? You wouldn't go to a vocal coach who knew nothing about the voice and how to use the voice, or a singing coach who knew nothing about singing. You wouldn't go to a golf coach who knew nothing about golf. You wouldn't go to a boxing coach that knew nothing about boxing. Right? So, like a lot of life coaches and hypnotherapists, they like to think that it's all about their techniques and not about their knowledge and expertise.
Hmm.
And they don't want to hear that knowledge and expertise count because then that puts a big burden on them to learn more than just tools and techniques. Now they need knowledge and expertise, right? So the reason that I say this is because, I don't work with fighters. So I don't know how it is exactly they need to be in the ring, right? Now, and again, it's going to depend on the individual fighter. Now, it might be the case, I might ask a question up front, like, what is it like for you when you're at your best? What do you like when you're at your best,
Hmm.
right? When you're in the ring and you're at your best. Now, they're going to go through in their mind and they're going to access various experiences. They might say, I'm just I'm super calm. I have a quiet calm. I have a focus. So I'm going to get from them what they're like when they're at their best. I'm going to start drawing that out more and more and more. So we want to know what they're like when they're at their best and what is it that keeps them from that. And maybe what is it that keeps them from that is sometimes I doubt myself, sometimes whatever. So we want to be able to create a choice. That's what I want to do for them. I want to build a more vivid set of perceptions about what they're like when they're at their best. Now, I might have some suggestions around that. I might have some intuitions about what might help. And that would be particularly true probably if I'd been a pro fighter myself, because then I've been in the ring. I know what it would be like for me to be at my best. So then I've got additional material for suggestion.
Hmm.
So, in absence of having that, instead of me assuming how they need to be at their best, I'm going to start bringing it out of them. I'm going to assume that they have unconscious knowledge of what that's like because there's going to be times and places where they've been closer to their best rather than further from. So, I really want to. build that up, create a really vivid representation in their mind of that. How do they feel in their body? How do they walk? How do they talk? How do they move? Who are they being? How are they breathing? What, really, what does it feel like to be inside of them at their best? And I might then get certain phrases from them that sum that up. So once they're in the state, I might ask a question like, when they're in it, I'll say, so as you're experiencing this now, I'm going to ask you a question. Just give me the first answer that comes up. What's your truth in this moment? What's your truth in this moment? Right. And they might go, I'm going to kill him or something like that. Right. And then you kind of bring that back because you want to create this anchor. You want to create more material for them to be able to have things that they can say to themselves, things that they can do that are going to bring this state back. Right. Now, the other state that they don't want, you want to teach them to move that into the background. Right. So I quite like the idea of foreground and background. I think at any given point in our life, we're foregrounding certain things and backgrounding other things. So sometimes in life, we foreground, I can do this, and we background all our doubts. And then in other times in life, we might foreground, oh, I don't know, and we background, wow, I can do this. So that kind of foreground background switch, it's like what I want to do with people, or what I would want to do, or one approach might be, because in the end, things are going to be individualized, right? And you could be in a conversation with somebody and they could say something and you go, and that gives you an idea, a creative idea about what might help them that you wouldn't have otherwise. So this is a very kind of generalized approach. But like teaching them, building what you want them to be able to foreground, really creating a deep acquaintance with that so they know it, right? It's very familiar. It starts to become even more familiar. And then, recognizing what they can do to draw that into the foreground and choose to remain centered in that and like knowing what doesn't belong in that state, right?
Mm.
So there might be certain doubts, there might be certain fears. It's good to know what those are because it's good to know they might try and show up and you need to know they don't belong here. That's not who I am right now,
Right.
right? So partly this is sort of unconscious work because there's always all learning involves unconscious learning. So you're working with deep unconscious processes. You're evoking the states that you want, but also you still want to have these. You still want to have conscious. You want to have your conscious mind to be able to kind of flick the right switches to get the thing going in the moment, so you can choose. Boom! This is how I need to be right now. This is what I choose right now. This, not that. That disappears. This. So, that's what I want to get going on, something around those realms. And sometimes it's going to be, after a while, if you're working with somebody, you start to pick up their resource language as well, right? What are the words they use to describe themselves at their best? What are what are the things they're saying when they're more dialed in to who they want to be and how they want to be versus the things they're saying when they're less dialed in? Once
Mm.
you start to get their resource language, if you are, working again hypnotically with somebody, you just keep feeding that resource language back because that resource language becomes anchored to those positive states. Now, I don't know about how Customato was working with um, working with Tyson, but the thing that a lot of people think about hypnosis is that it's all about, right, close your eyes deeper, 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 deeper. Yeah, you can get people to close their eyes and go into an imaginative flow, into the theater of the imagination or a sort of creative trance flow state. And you can do really cool things like that. But once you start dialing into people's resource language and their unresourceful language as well, you can use that language all the time. You could be doing pad work with somebody,
Mhm.
and still, once you know the languaging, that's going to bring them into that resource state. So Castellamato would have helped Tyson connect to that fierceness,
Mm.
right? So once he knows the language that fits with that fierceness, he can just use that at any point while they're training. Maybe Tyson's working the bag and Cuss is off to the side. He knows exactly what to say that's going to work as anchors to evoke that alter ego of whoever that might be. I'll just say this as well in sort of performance work like this. It can be really useful to actually name your alter ego.
Ah.
Just you actually have a different name for your alter ego. So you know, oh right, I'm being this now, you know. So a lot of high performers, you know, athletes, musicians, they will do this kind of thing. I did this myself in my own life. People know me by the name James Tripp. That's an alter ego name, but I go by it professionally, right? But I built that alter ego as my professional self for doing certain things because you know, um, my old mentor, Steve Chandler, he used to have a distinction, your social self versus your professional self.
Mm.
Now he was mostly a business coach, right? So he was about how you create your business, how you show up, how you be at your best when you're in negotiations, in when you're managing your team, and these sorts of things. But he had this distinction: your social self versus your professional self. He said too many people try and do business from their social self. And your social self is your kind of natural self who wants to be liked, who wants to be approved of, who wants to get on with everybody. So your social self is most concerned with sort of pleasing others and getting on with other people. Or you might have like a crazy dysfunctional social self that wants to dominate other people or whatever. But Steve would say you build your professional self. Forget your social self. Who do you want to be professionally? And when you show up in those moments, stop thinking about how you're coming across and start thinking about what you want to create. What outcome do you want? Who are you here to be? What are you here to make happen? And you build a professional self around that this highly attuned professional self. Now, this could be true if you're an actor. It
Mhm.
could be true if you are a negotiator or you're a salesperson, right?
Mhm.
Who do you need to be? How do you need to be? What is it that you want to create in that moment, right? Not how do I want to come across? What do I want people to think about me on any of that? It's like, what am I here to do? What's the job? So you create this self that is all about the job, right? So like, I have this. I'm a hypnotist, right? When I do my hypnosis work, I'm not me. I'm a different version of me.
Mm.
That's not the same me that's going to be doing, you know, casual chit chat and things like that. And actually, I used to find that a bit challenging at first because I had to shift gears sometimes with a client. You know, how do I shift gears into that sort of more hypnotic self, that hypnotic mode, and not have it be too weird for the client? In the end, I just decided that it could be as weird as it needs to be for the client, and that's okay. So I freed myself from having to make a smooth transition.
Mm.
You know, but anyway, I'm just saying that you literally people have this ability within them, but they don't know it because they get caught up in the idea I am who I am. Kids don't. Kids know they can be whoever they need to be or want to be. They do it all the time. Actors, like a Stanislavski method actor, they know they can become whoever they need to become for the role.
Mm.
But most of us fall for the idea of, well, I'm just not like that. You know, well, every time this happens, I always do this. I always. So they start to kind of hypnotize themselves with this story of who they are based upon whatever's happened in the past randomly and don't realize that they have within them, just as all kids do, you know, when a kid's pretending to be Superman, that kid is Superman,
Mm.
right? They are in the zone, right? So once we learn to work with these faculties that are naturally there for us, we can utilize them to create these professional selves. That could be as a fighter, could be as a salesperson, could be as a
Mm.
negotiator, could be as a, you know, performer on stage, could be just any aspect, any area of life,
Yeah.
performance selves.
I mean, it's something. It sounds like like in NLPs, like modeling or modeling excellence. Like, who have I got to be? Or looking at avatars of, like,
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So for me, the idea of modeling in NLP, that's just a way of getting source material,
yeah.
right? It's just source material. And if you go, well, I want to build this different version of myself, um, excuse me. Yeah, if you go, I want to build this different version of myself, it's go, okay, so how do I build that version of myself? Where do I look to? Now, it might be that I actually have reference experiences in my own past and my own history. Maybe they're kind of fleeting moments or whatever. Yeah, you know, there was this time I was more like that and more like that. And actually, in these situations, I can be more like that. So one place we can look for reference material for building a new self is actually within our own history. We've got all the bits, but they're scattered about. They're not coalesced into one. Another place we can look is go, well, who's got it? Who's more like I would like to be? Who seems to have the goods going on in this area, right? Now, a lot of people, they look to other people and they go, oh, I wish I was like that. I wish I could do that. I wish the modeling mindset says, what are they doing? How are they being? You know, what are their behaviors? What's their vibe? What's their energy? How would it be to be them? What would it feel like? How would I walk? How would I talk?
Mm.
Right? What would be important to me if I was them? You know, and it's getting deeply curious and bringing more of this on board. And there's a number of different ways you can do it modeling wise. Um, you can do sometimes what's called a deep trance identification. You can just, that's what method actors do. They just they just deeply and fully pretend to be that person. They as if, how would I be if I were that person? Right? They
Mm.
go fully there. They let go of who they think they are normally, and they go fully into this. And then you don't have to get it right because this is about creative source material. It's not about accurately representing what somebody else does. So yeah, like, and I'll say this by the way. I got into NLP originally because I really was having a miserable time in life. I had terrible social anxiety. Things were not going well for me in my professional life because of my social anxiety. I had general fear of most things in life. And I really thought that I was who I was. I also thought that I wasn't very good at certain things, and I was always destined to not be very good at them because I obviously didn't have the talent for those things. I was a big believer in talent when I was young, innate talent. And I picked up this NLP book really early 2000s and I opened it up. And the thing that really captured my imagination was this idea that people are patterned, that we are just basically a collection of patterns that we learned throughout our life. What we think is who we really are is just a bunch of learned patterns. And that whatever you learn, whatever learnings you've learned, you can adapt and modify. And you can learn new patterns as well. And you can use those other people who are good at those things to learn those patterns. That's what modeling is. So I started to use this at a point in the early 2000s where I was desperate. And I was really desperate because I was trying to change my career and I was having a lot of fear and insecurity around that. Um, So I started using this stuff. I started doing modeling. I started looking around. All right, who's got it going on that I want? And I didn't know how to do the modeling. Nobody had taught me how to do modeling. But again, as my old mentor Steve Chandler says, the want to is more important than the how to,
I like that.
right? It is true. Like a lot of people go, you say, well, you could do this. They go, but I don't know how. But you find someone that really wants something. And I've heard you say this on the phone to potential clients when I've been stood in your front room. I've heard you say, if you want it, you'll get it,
Mm.
right? It's where there's a will, there's a way. I sometimes say that to clients because I work with clients from various backgrounds and they don't all come in with a high performance mindset. They sometimes come in with life is screwing me in a variety of different ways and I don't know what to do, and I'll suggest something and they go, oh, I don't think I could do that. That sounds hard. And I just sort of jokingly say, so I guess you're not one of these where there's a will, there's a way people then, you know. Because that is true. Where there's a will, there's a way. That is true. Like when somebody's going, no, I got to get this. That's why, like you work in the area of addictions, when people really hit rock bottom, they go, no, I have to turn this round. I've
Mm.
got to do this now, right? This is now non-negotiable. Shit has to change, right? And then they find the way by hook or
Yeah,
by crook, they find that way.
we call it the gift of desperation.
Right, right,
It's really
right,
desperate, like I want it, I want it. It's like I don't care. And that's when you get
right.
it. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
when
yeah.
people get rock bottom and say, right, I've got to do it. And again, you can go the other way. If somebody really wants to succeed, say in combat sports, like, I really want that title, I really want to win. That'll,
Yeah, yeah.
we'll
I
fight.
remember this guy on Facebook, and he was a very good kickboxer. He'd won some belts and things, very good kickboxer. And he put this post up on Facebook saying, despite what therapists and life coaches and personal development people might tell you, real change as a human being is practically impossible, right? And he says, too bad if you're a psychopath, but we've all got our cross to bear. That's what he said, right? And I was like, I'm looking at this, and I said, real change is impossible. You've won that belt. How did you do that? Right? Were you born that kickboxer, or did you become that kickboxer? Did you become the guy that could take that belt? And I think that's it. It's like somewhere in his mind, he's just made this decision. I can't do that. But the guy, obviously, in a different context of his life, had a lot of will because you don't. He would have had to have trained. He would have had to have focused. He would have had to have made hard choices. He would have had to have done a whole bunch of stuff
Mm.
to become that belt-winning
Mm.
kickboxer. But he wasn't translating that to other areas of his life. Wasn't seeing it.
Mm. Of- Interesting. Because we're always learning. I mean, no, I was, something I know I was saying was that the only thing that's constant is change. Nothing
Yeah.
stays. We've got to change. We've got a choice. Either we can get better, or we can rather going forward. Was it you said that rather going forward or backwards? We're not staying the same.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. I always note that when I'm working with clients, sometimes they've got some idea of, some clients will go, oh, everything was fine until this happened in my life. I just want to get back to how I was.
Yeah.
And I'm always saying, well, there is no back. There's only forward,
Mm.
right? So we're going to get you going forward to how you're going to be. So like, I think a lot of people, when they're trying to do impossible things, like get back to the past, there is no getting back to the past. There's only going forward to the future. So, like it is reconnecting people with change.
Mm.
I had a client actually yesterday I was working with who does anxiety and panic. Um, and she was saying that her mum used to do anxiety and panic when she was her age, but her mum has now grown out of it, right? And her mum's always saying, look, you're this age now, you really ought to have grown out of this by now. And I said, I appreciate where your mum's coming from, but we human beings are very poor witnesses to our own processes. So I'm going to suggest she didn't actually grow out of this. She learned her way out of this. She figured her way out of this. Right? She solved the conundrum. Now, she may have done that largely unconsciously, and therefore she thinks she just grew out of it. We have an unconscious mind that's paying attention. And when we get to a point of going, no, I can't do this anymore, our creative unconscious mind can kick in and start creating solutions we never saw before. That's the gift of desperation sometimes as well. I used to do smoking cessation as you did with people. And I always get curious about whenever people naturally stop smoking. Somebody go, oh yeah, I used to be a heavy smoker and then I stopped. I'd always say, so what happened? How did you stop? And there's always some variation if they did it naturally without help. They said, I don't know. One day I just decided I'm done with this now. And, I smoked my last cigarette and I just knew I wasn't going to smoke anymore. Or I threw away the pack and there's some decisive moment. And I would always ask, was that the first time you tried? They go, oh no, I tried so many times before. So something happens and it's in the motivation. It's not in the how to, it's in the want to. Something
Mm.
changes in the motivation system and they go, I'm done with this. I'm done with this, you know. And then that adaptiveness, that resourcefulness that we all have, go, no, I'm going to find a way.
Mm.
I'm going to find a way beyond this. So like a lot of people miss that. And when it comes to change and change work, which is what I do, what I think about what I do, I'm aware that motivation is a major key.
Mm.
And but there are things that can get in the way of motivation that we can end up being pacified by or falling for the stories of. And this idea comes from a guy called Robert Dilts, so you'll know who Robert Dilts is, which is the three barriers to change are helplessness, hopelessness, and worthlessness. Right? Helplessness says, I can't do it. I don't have what it takes. right? Now, that's not a truth, that's a story that somebody gets mesmerized by or hypnotized by. So helplessness is I can't do it. Hopelessness is it can't be done. It's not possible. Like that guy saying real human change is not possible. That would be hopelessness.
Mm.
And worthlessness is I don't deserve it because I'm too much of a piece of crap or whatever. You
Mm.
know, and you see like one area that really illustrates worthlessness is I have worked a lot with armed forces veterans, and some of whom have come back from combat zones, and people they were close to didn't make it back, right? They didn't make it out. And then the person I'm working with has got like PTSD symptoms afterwards. But on some level, they're holding on to them because they don't think that they deserve to have a good life. You know, what kind of monster would they be to go on and have a good life when these good people who didn't make it out? You know,
Mm.
so that's an example of I don't deserve it, that worthlessness thing. I'm not worth the change. So you really get those barriers getting in the way. And I think that, so the opposite of that, helplessness is, do you know what? I think I can do this.
Mm.
You know, the opposite of hopelessness is, I think this might be possible.
Mm.
And the opposite of worthlessness is, screw it, why shouldn't I have that?
Mm.
You know, so when people have got those in place, they know it's possible. They know they might not know how to do it, but they know that they can do it. There is a way and that they're capable. And yeah, why not? Why not me? Why shouldn't I
Yeah.
have this? Why shouldn't I have a good life? Then a lot of internal forces within them come back alive and they start learning again, right? Like I said, people don't grow out of things. They figure their way out of things. They learn their way out of things. Kids do this all the time unconsciously, right? Like take a kid that wets the bed, right? They will stop at some point.
Mm.
Maybe sooner, maybe later. And it isn't that they grow out of it, it's that they finally unconsciously or consciously or some combination of both figure out the solution. What is it that needs to change? You
Mm.
know, like people don't expect kids to, well, unfortunately they do these days because like the psychiatry movement says your kid has this and it's deep in them. Um, but a lot of the time, your kids naturally pass through phases,
Mm.
they learn different things. I mean, you know, my oldest daughter, who's 20 now, she's never been interested in going to university, anything like that. She's never been remotely academic or anything particular. I mean, she's smart, but she's not into the academic side of things. She says, "Oh, there's a degree in, you know, in community work and performance that somebody had said about, and like actually, it's a portfolio-based entry, so I think I could get on it." I'm like, "What? What? You want to do a degree? Are you kidding me?" Like she was like not interested in that at all. And like that used to bother Lexi because Lexi would be like, "Oh, she needs to get some proper qualifications and stuff." And I'm always like, "Well, you know, when the time is right, what is meant to happen will happen." But it's not
Mm.
simply because she's grown out of something. Her mind has changed. Her perceptual sets have changed. Her beliefs have changed. Things have changed. That's a learning process. That's a discovery process. It's a transformation process. It's natural stuff. We fall
Mm.
for the idea that we're stuck,
Mm.
but our default is to learn and grow and adapt, not to get stuck.
Hmm. This is interesting. So, yeah, so kind of just finishing up. So the fighter's mindset. So like what I'm picking a lot from it is like, it's like the act as if the modeling, um, like the want, the desire really,
Mm.
goes unconscious. Um, I
Yeah,
mean,
motivation is important. Um, you know, I think picking those three things, the helplessness, hopelessness, worthlessness sort of thing. You know, generally speaking, I knew this badminton coach once who was very successful as a badminton coach, and one of the things was he wouldn't work with anybody that didn't already want it, didn't already know they could get it, didn't that they weren't 100% aligned motivationally. In his view, it wasn't his job to sort their motivation out. It's like if they didn't have the motivation, he didn't want to work with them. And that was very successful for him as a badminton coach because it meant that most of the people he worked with, because they wanted it, they got it, and he got the credit because he's the badminton coach. I'm not saying he didn't have good skills and stuff like that. I used to do that, by the way, with smokers. I used to like screen them for their motivation up front. And if I didn't think their motivation wasn't great, I wouldn't really want to work with them because it was going to be
Oh,
too much of a struggle. And then my friend Jurgen said, well, you're wimping out a bit there. Why not take the challenge? So I started taking the challenge of people who were less motivated and figuring out how to help them connect with their motivation. So I think perhaps some skills around knowing how to connect people to their motivation, because it is true to say that some people can be very motivated and then they can lose their motivation for a time. And if
mm,
you were working as a coach with an athlete and they'd been doing well, they were very promising and they started to lose their motivation, it wouldn't hurt you to have some skills to help people reconnect with their focus and their motivation. So there is that motivation side, but a lot of it is the modeling, the as if, it's creating the alter ego, that who do I want to be? What's the inner stance that I want to have? What's the attitude that I want to have? Right?
yeah. What you said earlier on in the beginning, like, when you've had confrontations in the street, you could say, it's how you've got this alter ego. And it's like
Yeah.
that, I will destroy you. It's that, and then things change because that it's a bit like the Clark Kent Superman or
Right. Yeah.
Batman. It's like boom.
Yeah,
And
you want to click into it. You need to know what you're clicking into. If you don't know it, you can't choose it.
mm,
It's that simple, right? So, people go, well, I don't know how I need to be. Well, that's then the job is create that. So you do know how
mm,
you need to be.
mm,
I just want to say, I love the term attitude, by the way.
mm.
In NLP, there's a lot of talk of state management or even state control. I particularly dislike state control. Let's talk about state
Very
management.
ambiguous.
Right. But like I'm like state management's hard work. Attitude management is much easier and state just follows.
Mm,
Right? So if you go, oh, I've got to get my feelings just right. When I get my feelings right, then I'll be able to do the thing. It's like that's such a wussy attitude in and of itself. If you go, all right, so how do I need to be in this moment? Right? Attitude is your position in relation to something. It's not just like how you feel. So it's like, I really like the idea of like, what's the attitude that I want to have here? Because you can have a great attitude towards a lot of things. You can have a bad attitude towards things. My youngest daughter the other day, she's been ill over the weekend and she'd been lounging around being ill. And then she was all bright and sparky. And I said, oh, you seem better. She said, oh, I decided uh, I'm gonna act like I'm not ill and I'm gonna get on with things. I was like, oh, right. I said, well, I said, there's a phrase here that relates to what you're talking about. And the phrase is living into. And so when you're ill, you could live into being ill, or you could live into being the best version of yourself. I'm saying not deny the illness. It's not about that. It's just like, well, how do I want to be right now? What is it that I want to live into? And then we had a little bit more conversation. She said, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. She said, I was really depressed at the end of last year. And then I realized I was listening to all this sad music and thinking all these sad thoughts. And I just realized that it would be better if I stopped listening to sad music and stopped thinking the thoughts and started like thinking more positively. And I said, well, there you go. So you were living into the depression
mm.
and then you chose to live into a different way of being. And what changed for you? She's like, well, yeah, like it didn't change immediately, but a lot got better quite quickly.
Mm.
Now, somebody who's down in the pits of despair might hear that and go, oh, you're making it too simplistic. It's not that easy. You know, I've heard that before. I had a client about 6, 8 months ago. I gave her a clear pathway out of her situation. She said, that sounds like hard work. And I said, really? Harder work than being angry and miserable all the time? Because, that seems like hard work to me. But,
You,
so it's like, is it hard work? I don't know. It's work, it's choice. It's like building something. It is work. There is work to be done.
as you
Um,
say, if they want to get better, if they want to get out of it, there's far more chance of that happening. That want,
right, right.
desire.
And I think that's one of the things. like as a professional change work practitioner, it took me a long time to not be sort of bullied, I suppose, by clients who didn't really want something, but said they wanted it. Or on one level, they believed they wanted it, but on another level, they didn't. It's like, oh, it's my job to make you want it. And one of the best ways to work with those sorts of things is like somebody's biting their nails and they're not stopping. And you just go, well, look, I don't think you really want to stop. That's okay. I'm not judging you. Like, in fact, it's not that much of a big deal, is it? I mean, so you're biting your nails. So what?
Mm.
Right? Or like my panic attack client, that's her term, panic attack, interesting organization of reality, not I panic, I get a panic attack. That's a very different organization of reality. Um, but, like in the end, underneath of all of her panics is a fear of death. That's what it is. She's got a fear of death, but she doesn't want to do anything about that. She says, I want to stop panicking, but I don't want to do anything about my fear of death because death really is a bad and terrible thing. It's like, okay. It's like, I'm like, well, the panicking is just warning you that you might die. Right? It's doing you a favor. It's helping you out. So, like, what do you want to get rid of something for? You don't want to die, and it's warning you might die. It's like, I don't see you need to change anything here. And it's like, so I want to challenge that thinking. And that's a motivation system thing. It's like, let's get this cleared up because your motivations are not clear, right? You say you don't want to panic when you think you're going to die, but you don't want to deal with your fear of death. So you just want to
Mm.
deal with the panic. You want to continue to fear death without panicking. Okay, well, that's not going to work out. So we've got to find a different way through this. But you can't just sort of convince people of things. Sometimes you have to respect the part that wants to do the problem,
Mm.
right? There's a reason for the panic. And
Yeah.
there's that part that doesn't want to let go of that at the moment. In fact, when talking to this particular client, there's no part of her that wants to let go of that. So where are we at?
Yeah. They got a
You
want,
know?
the
Yeah,
desire.
yeah,
Well, I realize you're a busy man because I know you've got an appointment coming up.
I do. Yeah, in
So you,
45 minutes, and it might pay to eat
you're the
something ahead of
PA
time.
here. But I
Yeah,
want to say thank you as always for your insight to this because I thought it's so interesting for this because I know you play both sides. You have done combat and also you're on the side of psychology, mindset, performance. So there's
Hmm.
see the
Well, I hope that people listening to this have found this useful because I'm aware that, like, I can sometimes talk, like, because I know you're a practitioner of change work and hypnosis and these kind of things, and I'm a practitioner of change work and hypnosis.
yeah.
I can kind of fall into the talking to practitioners rather than talking to kind of regular people mode. So I hope that I haven't gone too far in that direction. I hope that within this, there'll be some things that people can connect with. If I had one message that I really wanted people to connect with, and again, I'm not saying that this is no moral judgment here. There's no rule in the universe that says anybody should do this. But if I had one thing that I would want to connect people with is recognize that you can continue to create yourself and different ways of being in different situations. Sometimes people talk about, oh, in my formative years, like they're in the past. We're always in our formative years. There's a lot that's available to you, should you choose to connect with it, that you can use to create better experiences for yourself in life and better results. Better experiences, better results, whatever those results might be. I think those are the two things we're most interested in, having good experiences and good outcomes from what we do in
Mm.
the world.
That's been
Right.
fascinating. Love to get
Yeah.
you on again. You know,
Well, more than happy to jump on whenever you fancy.
you bet. And oh, by the way, since I've got you here, no, actually, I'll use it for another time. Wait for part two. I'll wait for part two, or
All right.
we'll go for it. But James, for just now, as always, thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Andy.
Take
Appreciate
care.
you inviting
Always.
me.
Take care, mate. Oh.
Take care. You got that?